Hey Matt, Emily Ray here. Just wanted to give you a little bit of feedback on this awesome resume that you created. I'm really just encouraged that you spent some of the extra time during spring break to put this together. It's certainly on brand with what you've been working on, but there are a few places that I just kind of wanted to make a few notes. The first one is that it kind of gives me just one flavor or one note because you've used this kind of extremely condensed text throughout. So I would, perhaps look for a contrasting font. This condensed text works well for like titles or, subtitles, headings, things like that. But in larger amounts of text, it's harder to read. And certainly when you're getting into these smaller details, it gets even harder. It's more difficult for the eye to kind of distinguish the words when they're all kind of this same note or tone. Looking up here in the header, I love that you have included your logo up here. It's interesting because it looks off center, right? Like you've put it in between these two things and the spacing is pretty consistent, but it seems like it's off center from, on the page. So to me, that looks a little bit off. I might move the logo over here to this side of your name and have it kind of, look and function in a similar way to a website header. These social media icons are, pretty large, and then your actual contact information down here is a lot smaller. So in a printed, version or form, these icons don't mean much. It's just that I can find you in these locations. It's not like if this was a printed resume, I could click on this and it would take me somewhere. So in a printed version, what I'm really looking for is this information so that I could go in and search for you or find you directly right here. So that might be something that you want to toggle, making this information a little bit bigger and these icons a little bit smaller if you intend to print this. Again, I would encourage you to keep this font for kind of these section headings, but change this down here to something that's a little bit more easily read. And I'm not sure about this kind of design element that you've included here, these brackets. I don't have any real context to understand why you've included that there in that way. Scrolling down the skills area, I like that you've created something, you've got some visual components here, but personally, I have, it's not a, I have kind of a different consideration for you to think about in terms of kind of graphically displaying your skill set along a continuum here, right? So the only thing that this graphic tells me is how well you know these things or these areas in relation to each other, right? Because I don't know what this spectrum, what it is that you've set here, right? So I have 3 or 4 different areas, bars, if you will, that like when they're colored in, I'm assuming that you have a more depthful skill set in that area. But I don't know if the top of the spectrum is like super expert and the bottom is like no knowledge whatsoever, or if it's more subtle than that, that like, the bottom level is a vague familiarity where the top level is, that I am proficient, or is it mastery? So it doesn't really give me actually enough information to make this useful, right? The only thing that this shows me is that you know these 3 more than you know these 3 over here, right? Like you feel as if your skills in coaching, customer service, and just the Apple operating system are more depthful than Microsoft, Adobe, and social media. And I'm not sure if that's the impression that you want to give. So down here we've got, some icons, talking about your hobbies. I would say like the titles of this, you've got all of your text aligned along the left-hand side here. I might, drag these titles over similarly. They just seem kind of floating out here in the middle. And again, I would encourage you to think about a little bit more breathing room, right? So making sure all of these elements aren't so close together. Last but not least, in the footer here, the same feedback applies, and that's that using this condensed text in this way. And it looks as if here you've even kind of spread it out, like you've given it a little bit more spacing, which to me is an indication that you're trying to make it more readable. But what you're doing is you're taking a font that's not designed to be used in dense blocks or large blocks of text, and trying to make it work instead of just selecting more of a contrasting, readable option for this. So with your brand overall, I would think about what is the font that I want to use for my logo, and then maybe some of these stylistic elements like the the headings and the subheadings and things like that, versus what do I want the font to be for my body text, that I know is easily read, because ultimately you want this resume to be seen and read, by potential employers or clients, and that's the number one, that's the number one thing you want to achieve. So you need to do everything you can to help support those people in their mission to get this information. Overall, just super pleased to see how hard you're working on this, and happy to look at any revisions that you make.